Hey up everyone. Today we have another video that looks back at some of the amazingly engineered bikes of the past. The 1980s was a time of change in the motorcycle industry, and that change had become very obvious in the world of dirt bikes, where the two-strokes had taken over completely. And the bikes that followed were all fiercely fast big bore two-stroke dirt bikes of the 1980s. They all had their moment in the limelight, and are the motorcycles that paved the way for the best dirt bikes we have today. They were a breed apart, and some are still hailed as the finest dirt bikes ever made. Their big advantages were high power, low weight, and simplicity, and that's a heady cocktail for any dirt bike. They might not have the technology of modern bikes, but what they lack in some ways, they make up for in others. Few bikes have the sheer force of character that the big bore two-stroke dirt bikes do, so they deserve their place in the Motorcycle Hall of Fame. I'm going back to the old format too. I will give you the obvious bikes first and gradually lead you to the less well-known bikes that deserve a mention. I will leave timestamps so you can jump from one section to another if you prefer to. Funnily enough, these fantastic dirt bikes all seem to reach their zenith around the same time. There were many bikes that led the way, but in 1985 we had such an array of fantastic machines, I have to consider this as the peak of the reign of the two-strokes. Remember, if you do enjoy the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more motorcycle madness. Have a look around and let me know your thoughts in the comments. There is a two-stroke specific playlist for those of you who have Castor R running through your veins, and we do have the best and most respectful motorcycle community on YouTube, so come and join us and enjoy the ride. This one has turned into a bit of a Captain America special, so thanks going to the team there too. Their museum is a treasure trove of amazing bikes that's definitely worth a visit. Don't forget to go and check them out. I've left some choice comments from Ken and the crew in this time. Big thanks as always to them for all the work they do. Anyway, first and very much the most obvious and commented about of all the two-stroke big bore dirt bikes has to be the Honda CR500R. The CR500R was the fire-breathing two-stroke monster built by the combined efforts of Soichiro Honda and the Honda R&D Americas team. The team that had created the Elsinore breathed that fire into the big bore Honda, and it's a wonderful example of what can be achieved by cooperation. They managed to release seemingly endless amounts of power from that engine. Some say about 60 horsepower, but in general, about 55 horsepower at the back wheel seems a more accepted figure. But it would churn out over 65 Nm of torque in the 1985 CR500R, and that bike is still considered one of the most iconic of all the big bore two-stroke dirt bikes. Discontinued around 2001, it had a 16-year production run and would still be being bought today if Honda would make them. Various updates did make the bike better over time, so the later models do have certain advantages, but they are all great bikes. From ironing out the initial mistakes to gradually improving the complete package, the final CR500Rs are a truly great bike, but they deserve the ultimate respect. If you don't give them that respect, you will get bitten.
That's a hallmark of a fresh bitch right there. This is an absolute monster. If you're looking for a rocket ship, your ship has come in. If you want a forever bike, this is it. You can get anything for it. This is the OG, the original gangster, straight up rocket ship. Big horsepower, massive third gear hole shots, and they're just absolutely bulletproof. I think we need a moment of silence, man. Just a moment of silence.
Next, we have the equally famous Yamaha YZ490. Yamaha's answer to the Honda was always fast. It might not have had the edge on power that the Honda did, but it did put that power to the ground better. Yamaha's package was easier to ride, and the power came in lower and smoother than the more brutal CR500R. Details like getting the adjustable compression damping sorted on the suspension were just worked out sooner, so it became a favourite among riders of all abilities. This wasn't a bike that only a pro could get the best from. Yamaha's monoshock system just worked better than anyone else's at this point. Power was around 50 horsepower at the back wheel, but with almost 50 Newton meters of torque coming in at under 6,000 RPM, it could kick like a mule. The YZ490's engine was a model in industrial simplicity, which kept the price of production down. It was a relatively simple reed valve engine that didn't have water cooling, resonance chambers or exhaust valves, but it worked so well it remained in that same unevolved state for years after its introduction. When introduced to replace the YZ465, the Yamaha faithful hated it, but in time it would go on to become one of the most loved dirt bikes of all times. Now, a good one is becoming an increasingly collectible bike. Find a good one and you will have a friend for life, but finding one in good condition won't be as easy now as it once was, and prices are increasing year by year.
This is the center port model. 84 on was a center port model. In the prior years it was a single down tube with a side discharge, and they were impossible to jet and they ran terribly, and it was really Yamaha's big mistake. I hate to say it. Those are great bikes, they have a cult following, but the center port YZ490, this was getting more towards that 90s steel frame, you know, YZ250, where they really figured it out. This is actually a phenomenal motorcycle. Air-cooled, simplistic, you don't have the radiators, it's thinner, slimmer, simpler machine, extremely easy to rebuild. This is like a really great bike right here.
Yeah, and it barks. It sounds nasty. When the boys were riding it down the driveway earlier, I was like, man, that thing sounds sick.
Next, we have the Kawasaki KX500. Initially described as violent and unrideable, the KX500 was the most powerful of all the Japanese big bore two-strokes. Producing almost 65 horsepower in standard trim, it was an immensely powerful bike, and weighing just 105 kilos or 230 pounds, it also had the best power-to-weight ratio of all the Japanese bikes. The motocross world changes faster than most, but despite this, the Kawasaki KX500 would go on to dominate start lines across the globe for much of the next 10 years. Kawasaki had kept the prices as low as possible for the KX500, and it proved a winner on and off the track. It stayed in production for over 20 years and became the benchmark by which all of the big bore dirt bikes were judged. The chassis was strong and stiff, so the Kawasaki delivered on handling as well as power. It did seem like Kawasaki had tried to either save weight or increase power with every component, and let's face it, Kawasaki have always been good at making powerful engines. It still retains its unrivaled reputation to this day, and for many, the Kawasaki KX500 will always be the king of the big bore dirt bikes. Now, sitting somewhere between the full-works Suzuki RM500 motocrosser and the ubiquitous TM400, Suzuki's RM500 should have been a roaring success. It wasn't, and it seemed that whatever Suzuki did, they just couldn't get it right with this one. The design was described as lazy, and it did rely a lot on what had quickly become outdated ideas. Slow steering and a flat, lifeless power delivery made it easy to ride, but it would never make it out of the gate first when faced with the other bikes here. Don't get me wrong, they were a good bike, just not good enough. In contrast to the Yamaha in particular, whereas the Yamaha YZ490 was very much more than the sum of its parts, the Suzuki RM500 always seemed a little less than the sum of its parts. It just never quite delivered what it seemed to promise, but I did need to give it a mention. Now we start to look at some of the less well known of the big bore two-strokes, and we have plenty to go at. So if you need a cuppa, maybe now's the time to go and pause the video and put the kettle on while we delve a little deeper. Next up, we have two bikes from the Maico factory, the Maico GP500E and the Enduro. Now Maico had gained a reputation for making the most powerful air-cooled two-stroke engines on the market, but the GP500E was an all-new water-cooled 500, built to try and wrench the crown of the most powerful dirt bike back from the hands of Kawasaki Heavy Industries. The bike was a beast, with a 13.5:1 compression ratio, but despite that, it was a strong and reliable engine. However, the company had been in financial trouble for years, and this was the final throw of the dice. In the end, in standard trim, it just wasn't quite as powerful as the Kawasaki, so it didn't warrant the extra price tag it demanded for most people. It was a great but expensive bike. Bankruptcy was inevitable, and this became the last of the Maico motorcycles made by the original company. The name did linger on though. Maico are still made in small numbers today, and this is the engine that spawned the final 700cc engines still manufactured by Zabel. These are the engines that became so successful in sidecar cross. I do go on to talk more about the Maico in the Dangerous Bikes video linked at the end and in the description. I also look at the GP250 and the Fastest 250 dirt bikes video linked above too.
With a new ignition, if you do it right, it'll start first kick every time.
It's always a sad loss when a company like this loses their place on the world stage, and it's a shame that these bikes didn't get the years of R&D that the Japanese bikes got. I wonder how good the GP500 would have been by the year 2000 if the company had been able to develop the idea further. The 2024 inventory sold out completely before the year had even begun, and they are truly great bikes that can more than hold their own in the right hands. The 500 Cross of today produces around 65 horsepower, but the development is very slow, to say the least. A small company will never have the R&D budget of the big boys, so that's understandable, I guess.
Awesome to ride in the desert on hill climbing, or if you want to take it out on a motocross track, a nice loamy track or a sand track like Southwick. These 500s are magic. Super rare piece, and it's an absolute rocket ship. A lot of fun to ride. You don't have to rev this thing out. It will rev out, but you can crack the throttle at 3,000 RPM and it'll be shooting a 50-foot Bruce like a motorboat. It's a rocket ship. It has a compression release, but I don't like using the compression releases. I just go to top dead center.
Next, we have what will be a more familiar name to many of our younger viewers. The 1975 Huqvarna 460WR had announced the arrival of a new contender on the world stage. 8 years later, in late 1983, we got the all-new Huqvarna 500XC and the 500WR. 4 transfer ports and a bridged inlet port system pushed power up in a major way, and the all-new 8-pedal reed valve on the induction ports made it efficient as well as powerful. It produced around the same power as the YZ490, but with an even wider power band. Happy to crawl along at a snail's pace, one flick of the throttle and you were instantly catapulted up the steepest climbs. Agile and with predictable handling, the Husky was a joy to ride and marked a huge leap forward for the Swedish company. It would still be many years before Jackie Martins put them on the top step of the podium in 1993, but this was the beginning of their rise to success. Their biggest problem was always turning that success into financial prosperity. They also had a nemesis in Europe. That company was KTM, and in 1985 we got a new KTM too, the KTM 500 MCX. This bike featured another new water-cooled engine, and it just felt different to the others. KTM had been winning in the smaller capacity classes, but couldn't quite crack the big one. The new engine was a very compact and lightweight design that, unusually for KTM, would focus more on smooth power delivery than outright power. Stroke length was increased, but vibration was also decreased, in a way even the smooth-running Yamaha and Honda couldn't compete with. This meant that as well as the engine being lighter, the frame could be lighter too. Throttle response from idle to 4,000 RPM was truly phenomenal, but beyond that, there was little advantage to keep revving it. Short shifting became the norm for anyone who knew how to get the best from them. Now let me be clear, it isn't that the power runs out at 4,000 RPM, it's just that in reality, there really is no point pushing it further. All that will bring is a big repair bill because of the Nicosia liner used. The low-end torque from the longer stroke motor just rewards you with another surge if you short shift quickly through to the higher gears. Don't get me wrong either, the KTM wasn't a winner on track. It just didn't have the sheer force of nature power that the Kawasaki and Honda did. Honda had been unbeatable in Europe throughout the 80s. Not even the power of the Kawasaki could topple them from the top spot in the Premier class. But by 1990, the KTM was chomping at their heels. It finally gave KTM a place nearer the top of the table in the Premier class, and it was a joy to ride.
That thing's an absolute rocket ship. Fastest production dirt bike, 126 miles an hour on the sand. Look at this thing. KTM 500 MX. This thing's straight up badass.
That's a 1985. Brings me back to 1985 or 86 when I raced one of these.
Last of the list proper today, you get my bias coming through again. In Varese, the Castiglione brothers were on a mission. That mission led to some successes and other failures, but their sheer determination should never be forgotten or underestimated. They had achieved success with the incredible 125 engines, and the 250 had begun to win too, but they wanted to win in the Premier class. Talks had been ongoing, but on the 1st of April 1986, they bought Huqvarna outright. And no, it wasn't an April Fool's joke. They took control of the company just 3 months later, and the result in a very short time was the Cagiva WMX and the MXR500s. These were probably loved and hated in equal measures at times. The bikes were fast and the chassis good, but the package just didn't come together quite as well as any of the parties would have liked. The Castiglione brothers were demanding, and that didn't always go down well in the companies they brought. Cagiva never had the direct success in the 500 class, but their involvement with Huqvarna would lead to the advances that helped Huqvarna finally take the title in 1993. Without the drive and ambition of Claudio Castiglione in particular, I am not sure that would ever have happened. So with the Cagiva MXR500, here I am talking about dreams. The reality was that it never performed quite as well as it should have, and was never made in high enough numbers to sort out the niggling little problems. You may find one of the bikes that has had those problems all ironed out. They are out there, just not many of them, but they do deserve their place here today.
Between the lines, the boss. This is the 500, the biggest, baddest one of all. The big block 500, the boss. And when you look at it closely, you can see it's got some real high-end components on it. Right out of the box, the WP4054 front forks. The triple clamps are polished aluminum, just absolutely beautiful. It's got a Brembo disc brake in the front. The engine is original. It's never been cracked open. It came from the factory with the Öhlins rear shock. They called it a soft damp monoshock rear suspension, soft damp. It's an Öhlins shock. Today that shock would set you back $1,700 roughly. We've had a lot of CR500s here come through. And I'm a CR500 guy, but I gotta admit, this is one of the coolest looking dirt bikes I've ever seen. Now, there's a story. There's always a story behind everybody, especially with Bob Hogan. If you know him, you know what I'm talking about. This one here, he challenged the New England Hill Climb champion on a CR500 to a best 2 out of 3 at Munson, Mass. And Bob smoked him in 2 out of 3 runs. And on a CR500 on this Cagiva, it's a kick-ass bike. It's got just as much horsepower as a CR500, maybe more. We haven't dynoed it. And it's very, very unique. I believe less than 1,000 of these were made. Listen to this beast, the Italian stallion, the boss, the Cagiva 500, the biggest 2-stroke Cagiva ever made. What an absolutely stunning machine. Now,
WP.
Our forks and Olin shocks were the best you could buy of that period. A set of forks like this today would set you back well over $2,000. There's about close to $4,000 with a suspension on this bike. If you took a Honda and you wanted to put WP forks on it, and an Olin shock and custom aluminum triple clamps, you're going to spend over $4,000. And it came with the Acront wheels. The Italians did not skimp.
Now we have some honorary mentions. I know I mentioned it briefly, but I have to mention the Suzuki TM400. It evolved from the evil, ill-handling early bikes into a favourite of many. The Suzuki TM400 was always fast, and it turned into a great bike over the years. I did feature it in the Terrifying Bikes video linked above, and although not a 500, it was a seminal bike for Suzuki, and it wouldn't have been right not to mention it at all. If only the RM500 would have lived up to the reputation that the TM had created. There were other great big board 2-strokes, and I know I'm bound to have forgotten at least one important bike, so do let me know in the comments. I would also like to give a quick mention here to 3 4-strokes, and before you start having palpitations, they are all special bikes that I will be featuring in a different video. The 4-strokes had been knocked off the top step as far as outright performance was concerned, but there were still some great 4-strokes on the market, and the big thumpers will get their own video. The 3 that stand out for me stand out for very different reasons, but they again began the route back for the 4-strokes. It would be many years before they returned controversially to the top step in racing, but they do have their place and should also be celebrated. I will do them justice in a different video, but for now, let us remember the Suzuki DR500. Forerunner to our old friend the DR650, the DR500 had many of the benefits of the 350, but with the grunt of the 650. This made it a fantastic bike in the rough stuff, with bags of torque. Then we have the Honda XR500RE. The XR500RE was the first of the Japanese 4-strokes that began to be competitive again against the 2-strokes. Some say it was the Yamaha that drove the move to 4-strokes, but personally I would argue that without the XR500RE, that move might never have been possible. And last but very much not least, we have the Gilera Dakota. The Dakota was a very different bike to the others here. It wasn't a racer, but it was one of the most powerful of the 4-stroke thumpers at its time. Designed by Lucio Massoud, the engine really was a masterpiece that would spawn the bigger 600s used in the RC rally bikes so successful at the Dakar and the later Nordwest too. A water-cooled engine with a twin overhead cam and 4-valve head. It had a tooth belt to drive the cams. It was a bigger, heavier bike with a 23-litre tank, so more of a dual sport really, and a precursor to the many adventure bikes we have today. If only those adventure bikes of today weighed in even close to the 150 kilo dry weight of the old Gilera. Progress again, eh? Anyway, that about wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching, and this video does link into several others on the channel, so I hope you will have a look around. Like I said earlier, there is a dedicated 2-stroke playlist to make searching easy. If you enjoyed it, which I assume you did if you got this far, don't forget to hit the like button, it really does help. and I would be honoured if you would subscribe and join the ranks of the best motorcycle community on YouTube. That way you make sure, at least in theory, that you find out about the new videos first. Do remember to check back though, because YouTube is a fickle beast and does seem to have an increasing habit of just resetting everything, and its memory is getting shorter and shorter. Do remember to check out the website too, and the Redbubble page, as well as the blogs and articles about the videos. You get the best biker merchandise anywhere. And always remember, ride free everyone!
Tabletop. It damaged his left knee, which has troubled him ever since.
There he was, though, back in action, and Thorpe looking for the inside line, and he goes through in past George Jobey, and Dave Thorpe is up into second place, forcing Jobey wide, and look at Thorpe chopping over. Well, Thorpe has been in trouble with some of his rivals, fairly hard riding Dave Nicol, and that